Keith, tell me who you are and how you got into this liberating structure stuff.
Yeah, Barrett, I'm happy to do that, of course. I got frustrated with how people work together. Fundamental challenges didn't seem like they were learning fast enough or deeply enough. Found or discovered complexity science. Joined some learning networks in which we just explored with all kinds of interesting people what was possible in different disciplines and domains. And eventually, after 7 or 8 years, started practicing in organizations, like trying some new things out, developed a repertoire, and got pushed by people I was working with, my colleague and I, Henry, to write a book. That book has gotten around a bit, and a lot of people use liberating structures in different settings to just replace the conventional ways that most organizations communicate with people, or the patterns that they're using are not getting the results they want. Yeah.
What are liberating structures?
Well, they are a very, very small pattern of interaction. Right? They're a very small way in which you work together with others, or even relationship to yourself, in which it's possible, suddenly, immediately possible, to include every voice in shaping what happens next. That's what they are, and they look like a set of methods. We published 33. There's probably 20 really good new ones since we published a book. And there's a set of principles and a purpose behind them, which make up the whole body of work. Most people think of them as these very simple methods.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And you said that you got into this, or you sort of evolved into liberating structures as you discovered complexity science, and in a context where things had not been working so well before, and some of the work you were doing. So how are liberating structures useful, making sense of complex environments, human contexts that are inevitably complex?
Yeah. Well, rather than paying attention to the individual parts of a system or the individual people in an organization, you focus attention on the relationships among the people. And those relationships, in turn, are defined by patterns of interaction. And once you focus on those patterns, it's relatively easy to make sense out of the problems we get ourselves in, the opportunities that are just beyond reach. And so those relationships reveal patterns that make it possible for us to make progress, to move forward, to get a sense of what could be a good next action to take.
Okay. What do we mean by human complexity?
Let's just think about a meeting with the people on your team. They come into the room. You're talking about something you've talked about multiple times. Everybody has a slightly different point of view and a set of experiences that they bring to what they think might be a good way to go forward, right? Or what's a solution or an action. And that's like would be an everyday meeting that you have. And each person has a set of experiences that they've formed on their own. And suddenly they start to combine them. And how it is that they get combined, those experiences, makes a huge difference in whether or not they can find something that they all consent, that they agree enough that they would take action. They would invest their time and energy in that movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so that complexity, all the different experiences, the stories, the evidence they've collected over time, comes to a point in which they're together in a room trying to forge or adapt to a situation. So that's the complexity. And they're different people, they have different spiritual tradition, they bring everything. It's just that difference can be ignored or treasured and worked with. That's the complexity.
Thank you. That's a nice segue to the idea of active sense making, which is the methodology that Spryng is endeavoring to leverage, which is in effect an invitation to a community. It could be quite large. You could imagine, the board meeting that you've talked about, where you have 15, 20, even 100 people, and you could have a workshop, a liberating structures workshop around this thing. It becomes a little more problematic if you've got 1,000 people or 25,000 people to gather those stories and discern those patterns. And so the intention of Spryng is to have an invitation that invites people to share experiences and then to interpret those experiences. And with the view that out of what emerges out of all that is a sense of the patterns of those interpretations and the patterns of those experiences related to the interpretations. And you and I have been talking about active sense making and the methodology of Spryng. And we've talked about how using liberating structures at the front end to help to create the instrument that ends up being the invitation for people to share experiences, interpret them, and then using liberating structures at the end, where again a group of representative stakeholders looks at all what has emerged out of from the stories shared and the interpretations, and again starts making sense of them with looking to what are next wise actions that they might take relative to those things. Curious your thoughts, but from what I've shared with you and what you've heard, do they fit together? Do you see the complementarity of the methodology?
Yes. So what we do now, I'll just tell you what we rely on now to scale. So the way that I would talk about it is we're liberating every voice to shape what happens next. And because this patterning is going on all the time, right? It's simultaneously and mutually shaping what happens next. So that happens all the time. And so currently how we scale that productive simultaneous mutual shaping with liberating structures is we bring together, I don't know, there's different numbers of people, as diverse as we can get, that represent the people who care about that particular challenge we're addressing. And we make sense out of the context using a liberating structure like impromptu networking or appreciative interviews. Stories are told in short iterative cycles. So you hear, and each participant is doing that active sense making as they go. And what we're doing is introducing a method that can be repeated by each of the participants with the next group of people that are in their immediate network. So what we currently do without Spryng is invite a design group to deeply learn these methods so they can repeat them at scale, at other scales with other domains. And so each exchange, each group we have together, they collect only those stories, and that active sense making is only available to them. There's no record of the sense making, and it's only analyzed to the degree to which they write things down on a whiteboard and in their memories, in their collective memories. And they may we always encourage that that design group returns to that method in which they made sense out of the stories they're telling each other. But there's a limit to that. I mean, do they repeat the method? With what fidelity do they do that? So we're limited in part without software to record as we go and more carefully analyze the patterns that are present and provoke more curiosity about, well, what are they? Do those patterns repeat at multiple scales? A convenient way that I'll talk about it is with even a small group of people, that pattern that we're starting to notice, that interaction pattern, that story we're hearing about how we're working to address some challenge, that I'll say, I'm assuming that that's a fractal. It's self-similar at all the other scales, at all the other levels, at the whole system. That pattern that we're exploring and seeing possibilities for wise actions and more of the dimensions of it and really getting it, that is the solutions that we're making are scalable because that's the same pattern that repeats across and up and down and out. Now, that's an assumption. I would like to have more certainty about that. And I'm imagining that Spryng does that beautifully or elegantly. That's what you've suggested to me.
Yes. And a really, really fundamental conviction that you've expressed and that underlies the whole reason for Spryng is that every voice really matters and is important and is unique. And so the effort is, how do we gather those voices in a way that takes that uniqueness seriously without abstracting from that uniqueness, but then in the scale of all that uniqueness, that's where the fractals start to become evident. And to the extent that we can gather those voices. So I would think of it as a methodology to gather those voices that is faithful to the principles that you've described, and what you're doing with liberating structures at the scale that's possible and enlarging that. And yet at the same time bringing it back, because at the end of a Spryng project, again, representative stakeholders are brought back together to look at the patterns that have emerged in all of those voices as they've shared and interpreted their experiences.
Well, and I know, working in multiple domains, it's quite difficult to bring in all the voices because traditionally they've been excluded or dampened or undervalued. And so any methodology that helps bring more people into the conversation, more inclusive, not just making sense of things, but what kind of next steps are occurring to people that are in the middle of things rather than always on the edges of things. And so the degree to which you collect stories over time, and you can reach out and get more of those difficult to reach people who care about the challenge, that's wonderful. That's really important. And I struggle at the beginning of every engagement or every group I'm working with, like, well, couldn't we include, clearly there are more people who care about this thing you're trying to accomplish or do. How are we going to have their voice? Why wouldn't we include them if we could, if it was easy to do? So the degree to which you can do that, it would be a big reason to use Spryng.